Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Kentucky Small Business Development Center's Wednesday webinar. While we give everyone a moment to join us, I'd like to share some information about the Kentucky Small Business Development Center, or Kentucky SBDC for short. So we have 10 centers across the Commonwealth that serve all 120 counties. The Kentucky SBDC's professional staff has a wide array of knowledge and experience in various industries. And what that allows us to do is provide a customized service that meets your particular business needs. We provide no-cost assistance in areas such as market research, opportunity assessments, as well as business plan development and execution. And we also help in identifying pre-venture or growth capital for your business. Our program is co-sponsored by the U.S. Small Business Administration and administered by the University of Kentucky in partnership with regional universities, community colleges, and the private sector. We're part of a national network known as America's Small Business Development Centers, which provides services to every county in the U.S. So if you're in Ashland, Kentucky, or Zionsville, Indiana, a Small Business Development Center is there to serve you. To learn more about us, you can visit kybizhelp.com to search more resources and actually find out what social platforms we're on. So find your favorite and connect on there. To request personal assistance, you can go ahead and get started by calling 1-888-475-7232 or email us at info@kybizhelp.com. Recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you later this evening. So if you have trouble with the audio or you just need to step away, know that you'll have access to the entire recording later today. I'm Janet Flom with the Louisville Center, and moderating today's discussion is also from the Louisville Center, David Etkin and Tony Sears. Good afternoon, guys.
Hey, Janet. How's it going?
It's going good for a Wednesday.
All right. So, as everyone knows, the governor has released guidelines as of yesterday to kind of help our economy open with specific practices that you have to do. And I know I've gotten a lot of questions on this. So today we're like to welcome our guest speakers. We have Tod Griffin from the Kentucky Retail Federation and John Launius with Greater Louisville Inc. He's the senior regional economic developer here. With me, and we have a lot of information. We don't really have some slides to show today, but we're going to do more of a just kind of a talk. We've lost a bunch of, or we've released some of the guidelines for you to see, and Kevin, if you go ahead and do that. Also, it's highly recommended that as part of following the guidelines that you produce a written plan for your business to share with your employees and your staff. We also have included in your packet there an example for you to use as you kind of craft your own plan. So with that, I'd like to introduce Tod. Tod is going to kind of walk us through industry-wide. And as always, please enter the chat. Any questions you have, we're going to get to them. Tony and I will answer or ask as many questions as we can. And John and Tod are here to help. So we've got a good session today. So, Tod, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this Wednesday. I'm Tod Griffin, president of the Kentucky Retail Federation. The Retail Federation is a statewide trade association and advocacy association based in Frankfort, representing the retail industry at large. Our members include multi-state chain operations as well as independent mom and pops across the state. And we represent about 6,000 storefronts across Kentucky.
Awesome. So what's the latest guidelines on opening a business now?
Yeah, so as the governor has announced his phase 1 Healthy at Work initiative to reopen the economy, the important thing to remember for folks and businesses and really all entities that are preparing to reopen, and even for those that have been open through this as an essential business, there are really two different documents at play here, and there's been a little bit of confusion in that regard. So I wanted to kind of go over just real quickly, the first document, which I think we have as a reference for everyone, but this is the Healthy at Work minimum requirements for all entities. And this is a little bit more expansive than the governor's 10 steps to healthy at work. It's actually 14 points that are in the document. John and I were kind of laughing about that yesterday when we were visiting. So it is a 14-point document that businesses need to look at. And the important thing is, if you are getting ready to reopen, or even if you have been open, you need to be able to meet all 14 of these minimum requirements as per the governor and his staff. So I just wanted to briefly touch on these real quickly and then move into the more specific retail plan. So again, there's two documents. One is the minimum requirements for everyone, and then as different industry sectors across the Commonwealth are able to reopen, you'll have to refer to your individual sector requirements. And I think John will go over some of those. I'm going to touch on the retail one real quick. But as far as the minimum requirements and the 14 steps, the first is to continue telework as much as possible. So this is, and the governor mentions this just about every day during his press conference. So for those operations that can continue to telework, work from home, he recommends that still be the case. The other is recommended phase into work. If you have employees that you can bring back a little bit at a time. Now for our industry, the retail industry, and it'd be very public facing type of business, that may be a little bit more difficult than some other situations like in office or others. The third is to enforce the social distancing, and we've all kind of gotten to that habit, I think, over the last couple of months, and that still is going to be a minimum requirement. And the other is to limit face-to-face interaction. The next one is dealing with universal face coverings, masks, and PPE. I think John's going to cover that a little bit later, but I did want to let you know that as a minimum for all entities, that businesses must ensure to the greatest extent practicable that employees have a face covering. Customers are not required to have face coverings unless it is a business's policy to require that. So that again has been a little bit of a question as well. And then access to gloves, the minimum requirement is that to ensure that employees who have job requirements that do a lot of touching, a lot of high touch areas, that they do have gloves, and that they also follow the applicable federal guidelines for gloves. The sixth point is to make sure that hand sanitizer is available for both employees and customers and the public, and to encourage frequent hand washing. The seventh is another confusing area that we've had a lot of questions on in restricting common areas. Now, this does not mean to close down common areas, but just to restrict access to maintain the social distancing. For example, in a break room where you have tables of 4 chairs, perhaps take out some of the chairs so that folks can social distance in that regard. The 8th is proper sanitation. There's all kinds of stuff about sanitation out there. That is definitely one that's a minimum requirement. And then number 9 is conduct daily temperature and health checks. This is one we've had a lot of questions on. The governor is continually updating the guidance on the health checks. But basically at this point in time, temperature checks and health checks can be done when the employee arrives for his or her shift. They can be self-administered before they show up to the workplace. And there are guidelines within this minimum requirement documents and a list of questions that employers can use to be able to do that. The 10th is to create a testing plan. That, of course, is much easier today than it was 2 months ago, as multiple testing sites have opened up across the Commonwealth. But you should put a plan together for testing in case any of your employees do fall ill. The 11th is to make special accommodations. Now, this is surrounding making accommodations for employees and customers that are more at high risk population. For instance, on the retail level, many of our retailers have opened up special shopping hours for the at-risk population. The 12th is to designate a healthy at work officer, someone on your team at your place of business that can kind of direct the compliance guidelines and make sure that everybody is trained and know what they're supposed to do. And then the 13th is education and training of your employees. Make sure they know how to wear the PPE that you're providing and your cleaning and disinfecting protocols and other things. And then number 14 deals with the contact notification requirements. And there is guidance within the document to be able to do the contact notification. Basically, it's in a nutshell, it's you must be able to assist public health officials if you have an employee that tests positive. So those are the 14 healthy at work steps. And again, that is referenced, I think, as a handout in the webinar today. So real quickly, let me touch on the highlights of the retail business healthy at work requirements. And again, this is in addition to the minimum ones. So in retail, we did submit a proposal to the governor on May the 1st and worked with the governor's staff to tweak a few things. On May the 8th, last Friday, the governor did release the retail requirements for the industry. It basically is broken into 4 different parts: social distancing, cleaning and disinfecting, personal protection equipment, and then safety and training. So in hitting the highlights, basically it is recommended that retailers maintain their curbside and delivery. If you're a retailer that's been able to do that, the governor recommends that you continue that up, including online ordering as much as possible. If you do decide to open your store up to the public, there is a limit on the number of customers that can be in the store at any one time, and that's limited to 33% of capacity. That does not include employees or staff or vendors. It is customers. However, there is a self-limiting provision in this, in that it doesn't matter how many folks you have in the store, employees and customers. If you can't meet the 6-foot distancing requirements, then you're going to have to lower that level of folks inside the store at one time. And then in addition to that, you be thinking about establishing a system so that if you have more than the 33% that want to enter the store, you have some kind of process where the customer could stay in their car, you could phone them, you could set up queue lines or waiting lines outside the store and that type of thing. One-way aisles and internal traffic flow is another piece that you want to consider. And then, of course, if you've been to an essential business, a grocery or a hardware store, a home improvement store, you've seen where they've marketed 6-foot distances in the checkout lanes, and that is a requirement for the retailers as well. Be thinking about, as you're thinking about your POS systems and your checkout, if you can implement any kind of contactless payment options and pick up and delivery of goods as much as possible. I know some POS systems allow you to not have to sign the PIN pad. And so be looking at those as an option. Contact your provider and see if there's some options out there for you to be able to do that. Delivery, for those retailers doing deliveries, in-home deliveries are allowed. They have been allowed, but just to make sure that if you have more than one staff person or associate in a truck, in a delivery vehicle, that they do wear masks and try to distance as much as possible. And then, of course, maintaining the good sanitation if you decide to deliver inside the customer's home as well, and maintain the distancing. On warehouses and loading docks, please make sure that you set up a system whereby you have minimal interaction with your delivery drivers as they're entering and exiting the business. Again, provide plenty of hand sanitizer, tissues, hand washing facilities as much as practical in your business as well. A couple of other areas of note specific to different types of retailers. The requirements say that you should not allow sampling of products or customer bulk bins. For instance, in some sporting goods stores, they may have a bulk bin full of basketballs. That should not be allowed under this requirement. And then there are provisions about closing public seating areas and children's play areas, probably more so in a shopping mall situation where that would take place. And then there's a number of procedures dealing with fitting rooms, dressing rooms, and making sure that you come up with some sanitation requirements, allowing one person at a time into the fitting room area. Be thinking about how you're going to handle clothing items if you're a clothing store, to require or encourage customers to not to touch the merchandise as much as possible. I know that that's going to be very difficult, but be thinking about how you might want to encourage your customers to limit the touching of different items before they actually buy them. And in that same vein, also be thinking about what your return policy might look like going forward. Are you going to allow returns? If you are you going to extend the time period for that return to take place? And then if you do receive the merchandise in as a return, how are you going to sanitize that item and put it before you can put it back out onto the showroom? There's a whole section on cleaning and disinfecting. I won't go into that. There's a lot of detail in that. And then on the PPE, personal protective equipment section, I wanted to just touch on gloves real briefly. Even though gloves are required for high touch areas in the minimum requirements, it's a little, it's more encouraged and assurance that gloves are available for employees in the retail requirements. So we're still trying to get sort of I guess more of a clarification on that. John may have some of that too. The CDC and some of the federal requirements or guidelines, gloves are still a little bit up in the air. I've had some members of ours tell me that they are not requiring gloves, but they do have them available for employees. So I guess that's sort of still to be decided as far as what you're supposed to do in that regard. And then the last I'll touch on is make sure you have lots of in-store signage. If you have one-way aisles, make sure you have signage available. If you do encourage or require face masks for customers, have that signage. Certainly, we would encourage you to have signage on the floor if you want to. There are a lot of different sign companies that have created lots of neat signs out there, or you can certainly make your own. So you don't have to go to a lot of expense on the signage, but we do want to encourage you to have plenty of signage up. And then if you do have a in-store PSA system or audio system, there's a lot of messaging out there that's free and available where you can continue to have reinforcement messages going on in the store as your customers shop. And then the last thing regarding training, just to make sure that your employees are trained, that they know what's going on, make sure you document as much as possible for later on down the road, just as a legal protection for you as a business owner. So I'll stop there and wait for questions later on. And I guess turn it over to our next presenter.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Quick introduction. I'm John Launius. I'm the Director of Regional Economic Development here in Greater Louisville. And so, pre-COVID, my primary responsibilities were around business attraction, working with companies and consultants assessing our market. GLI manages our region's economic development partnership, which is a bi-state economic development group that includes 15 counties, both in Indiana and Kentucky. But like Todd and many of you on the call today, we pivoted to better serve our community and our customers. And so we have been working tirelessly to support our investors and really the community as a whole at working through this as we go. So like Todd, we made a number of recommendations pre-announcement once the governor started to kind of unveil his guidelines and policy, we quickly kind of changed from the recommendation phase to really submerging ourselves in these policies to stand here as a resource. So I want to thank SBDC for inviting us to have this platform to be a resource. So like Todd, I'm going to quickly go over a couple of the industry specific guidelines, specifically the office-based businesses, as well as some of the manufacturing, distribution, and supply chain details. I'm also going to weave in some of the best practice recommendations that we uncovered through this process, and then we'll talk a little bit about additional resources as your businesses begin or continue operating. So with that, I'll draw your attention to the documents that should have been distributed. It's the Healthy at Work document requirements for office-based businesses. Again, knowing that some of these carry over from the cross-industry minimum requirements. I'll try not to be too repetitive, but definitely wanted to cover some of the differentiators. So again, there is a requirement that you continue the teleworking option for employees as applicable. The second bullet relates to your office, present in your office, which is being limited to 50% of your employees. Again, just trying to ensure the ability to adhere to the social distancing requirement. But each business, I think, is incumbent upon them to really assess their needs. And if below that 50% threshold enables you to adhere, then that's the advice taken. But at minimum, 50% of your employees should not be present during phase one. As far as PPE and face masks, there is a requirement, again, cross-industry. As related to office businesses, there is the PPE face mask requirement. It is specifically noted that this should be followed in more common areas where interaction with other individuals is likely, including hallways, conference rooms, bathrooms, entering and exiting facilities. But there is a special note that it is not required for individuals to wear a face mask if they are working in their personal offices alone. Obviously, if anybody enters the office, the threat reappears, and so it would be expected that your staff do wear face coverings in their office if other individuals are also present. There's a note related to digital files and just the expectation that companies continue to utilize and incorporate digital files and formats into your operation for invoices, inspections, approval processes. Again, all ways to mitigate contact of document transfer. In addition, there is also, again, true to all industries, just a really relevant note related to internal meetings and the requirement for the 6 foot of separation, even in those internal office meetings. And again, reiterating the requirement of the face mask when those individuals are meeting in the same room, obviously with a preference for meetings, in-person meetings, to be taking place electronically or virtually if at all possible. Lastly, relates to traffic flow. And again, you've seen this kind of threaded throughout the other industries, but really just taking an individualized look at your facility and your workflow and really looking to adapt that to minimize contact and interaction. In addition to that, like Todd noted, there is some specific language around cleaning and disinfecting requirements. Again, it's around building in processes and repetition of cleaning, particularly within one's work area, but also within high-touch equipment and areas. So think your copy, your mail room, bathrooms, those other kind of high-traffic facilities, and making sure that you have the disinfectant and sanitary equipment available, but also that you have a process incorporated to routinely monitor and disinfect. Same is true with training and safety requirements and proper signage and training of staff and utilization. I'm going to switch over to manufacturing now quickly. And again, at a high level, just try to hit some of the differentiators. I know we have a very diverse group of folks on the call today, and no matter your scale, I think there are best practices here that can be translated into your environment. So I do think it's important to note a few of these. It relates to the first one relates to again your shift scheduling and making sure that your operation maintains the 6 foot distancing. In a manufacturing or distribution environment, many times these are much more open environments and less infrastructure in terms of dividers and protectors. So it's really important to look at your line or your operations, create that 6 foot plus of distance when applicable. Also noting that oftentimes in some of the more labor intensive functions, that 6 foot is really meant as a minimum, and that heavy exerting activities oftentimes will require additional space or additional barriers or thought to go into protecting your staff and your operations. Where the 6 foot distancing or more can't be appropriately incorporated, there is a requirement for mediums or physical barriers such as plexiglass to be installed. Any modifications that enable you to adhere to the 6 foot distancing is specifically noted within the manufacturing guidelines. Staggering of work shifts, as well as breaks and lunch hours, again, all in an effort to mitigate the bottleneck opportunity and mass gatherings of individuals. And so really just thoughtfully looking at the way that your workforce operates both on the line and off the line, and incorporating any staggering that might alleviate any of the vulnerability to clustering. Time clocks have been noted. If you've watched any of the press briefings, many operations still do use the physical time clock function. And so there is a specific note around the vulnerability with the physical time clock. And so operations that are able to circumvent that or to readapt to a touchless or a technology-based system that, again, lessens the vulnerability of everybody within an organization having to physically touch an item. For organizations where that is insurmountable, there is a specific exception or a note that would require ease and accessibility of sanitization between each use. So again, if you are required or have to use a physical time clock, sometimes those staggering best practices can also help alleviate some of that clustering, both for the use of the time clock, but also in the line building up to use the time clock. And it can also provide a little bit of a buffer to make sure that you're able to disinfect or sanitize the equipment prior to individuals behind you. Another note is around restricting access to those common areas, which I know can be difficult, particularly in some of the manufacturing and distribution functions. But weight rooms, water fountains are also specifically noted, again, as a high touch, highly vulnerable kind of environment or activity that many operations have. So it is required that water fountains public water fountains not be utilized. There is also a note that would require employers to offer an alternative. There has even been some specific language around the water bottle or water, I'm at a loss for words here. The water system that requires the tank. But again, back to just realizing and recognizing the high touch mechanism with non-touchless dispensing mechanisms. And so you just want to be, again, mindful that there is a sanitary process and sanitizer easily available to disinfect. Again, I know Todd noted this as well, but particularly in manufacturing and distribution, you've got a high volume of dock usage, many times, multiple times daily. And so it's even more imperative that this sector acknowledge that and incorporate strategies to minimize engagement at the door docks and with items coming in. Vehicle riding together in vehicles. This is also kind of an area that's noted that should be mitigated if and when at all possible to single rider vehicles. If co-riding is required, again, it is required that face mask and other appropriate PPE is incorporated. Related to PPE, I want to kind of circle back to that as Todd noted. The PPE, there is a specific note that does provide an exemption, and this is particularly in manufacturing and distribution, related to an exemption based on the health or wellness of the individual or the vulnerability to the work environment. And so if wearing the face mask does cause an environmental hazard for your work environment, that can be seen as an exemption, as well as if the employee has a medical issue that would also potentially cause or make them vulnerable to a medical issue, such as respiratory issues. Those are also noted as specific exemptions. So just really quickly, I think as Todd did, we I think all done a little bit of research related to some best practices that aren't necessarily formal guidelines. So I just want to quickly note a couple that we found really useful and that companies that we've met with have also found beneficial. And that is just around kind of a broad sense of doing some individual job assessments. Every organization has multiple functions, and so I think sometimes the elephant can be very hard to chew. And so one strategy is really to work with your team and your staff to prioritize individual job roles and assess them as you move forward. Another tactic that's been interesting is removing non-essential doors. You think about high contact areas and just really, so looking at your operation, obviously for retail and other more forward facing on a nice day, little things like even propping entrance doors open, removing or propping open doors open that staff are frequently utilizing can just be a very easy tactical way to incorporate some best strategies. As much coordination with your vendors and suppliers as possible. As you know, you have unique relationships with many of your businesses, and so incorporating and coordinating with them as best possible is always a best practice. Leaving items untouched for 48 hours, again, no matter what industry you're in, you either have raw materials or equipment or products coming in and out all the time. So really looking at and monitoring how you can minimize your risk by just letting items set in maybe a staging area for 48 hours. Can also be a really low cost, easy way to really mitigate some of your organizational risk. I think we're talking a lot about technology and virtual learning. And so another note that we've been incorporating and reminding folks is just to really be deliberate about your cyber technology. We have a lot of data sharing and a lot of vulnerability to our customers. And so a lot of this is really based on protecting our staff and our customers and relaying a sense of confidence. And so really evaluating your cybersecurity and readiness can also be a great tool. I guess the last thing that I wanted to mention is around communication. I think sometimes this gets lost because there are so many tactical approaches and best practices, and that is just related to communication. We talked a lot about signage. I say there's a reason why there's a hand washing sign at every restaurant. It's because it works. Those little soft reminders work. And so whether for your staff or your customers, be sure to really evaluate and incorporate signage, as each operation is going to be very individualized. And so the more customized signage that you can incorporate, the better. The second communication is related to your staff. This is a dynamic time for all of us, and I think folks are experiencing this in different ways. And so to the degree that companies can be transparent and collaborative and really open with your employees, I truly believe, and companies have affirmed this, that the better resources and tools that you're going to be able to incorporate. Your staff know your operation better than most. And so being able to collaborate, rely, and keep them in the loop will both enhance the quality of your response, but also simultaneously, hopefully minimize anxiety, and really, I think, instill a sense of responsibility to your staff. And really, that's where a lot of this is going to lie. So I think the last thing maybe that I really wanted to mention, and I want to toss it back over to Todd really quickly before we open it up to Q&A, because I know that he maybe has some resources that he would like to note as well. But GLI, as I kind of started, has tried to be a support service with so much information and such a complexity to the dynamics of COVID-19. We have developed an online resource through our website. I'll post in the comments section here the website address. But in that, on that site, you're going to find a range of information, including federal, state, and local updates and news. We're also going to have a lot of public health guidelines, but most notably business and community resources. We had a lot of industry best practices. As I said, we created a document based on recommendations. We've now converted that into industry-specific best practices, such as the ones noted, and a much deeper array. And so on that website, you'll be able to download a document that will really walk you through a lot of high-level best practices that are specific to your industry or your sector. There's also a job board. We have created a displaced worker program that has been critical to supporting companies that have unfortunately had to furlough or let go a number of workers. They love their workers, and it's a very hard decision for companies to make. And so we're able to offer them other connections from maybe other organizations that are currently staffing up. We've got a hotel on one end that might be laying off a lot of frontline cleaning staff. But on the other hand, we've got hospitals that are looking to scale up some of their laundering facilities. So where can we be a broker and a matchmaker between some of these opportunities? And so that's been a role that we've been very active in. In addition to a lot of educational resources and webinars that are ongoing. But lastly, and maybe most importantly, that I want to end with is circling back on the PPE, a term we're all very much familiar with now, and that is embedded through many of these guidelines cross industry. And so one issue that companies are encountering is the availability, the ability to procure PPE. And where we do recognize that this is still a struggle, what we have done on our website is create a list of partially vetted organizations, suppliers, and manufacturers that are offering a variety of PPE. And so on that site, you can kind of filter by the product that you're looking for and see a range of contacts or companies that are offering that solution, and you can make direct contact. One additional kind of attribute that we have incorporated, recognizing that a lot of smaller companies have had a difficulty in procuring an amount or ordering an amount that would be useful to their operation. The higher the volume, obviously the easier it is oftentimes for these companies to be able to secure a pricing or even to procure the item. And so GLI has ventured into this world to create a solution to this problem. And so for any individual interested, I'll share my email, but would be happy to send you a link where it's actually an order form for face masks. One last note I want to make related to PPE is there is some language that has been somewhat confusing or has been left for interpretation, and that is the incorporation of language related to cloth face mask. And so individuals are asking, is that specifically a cloth mask? And we have sought guidance on this from the governor's office. We have yet to hear back, but hope to very soon. The way that we are interpreting this is a designation between a medical grade N95 mask and other masks. So we do not interpret it at this point as being strictly a cloth-based mask, but merely a function of them communicating that it is not required that you have a medical grade N95 mask. And so with that, I want to toss it back over to Todd really quickly to cover any resources or additional comments before we open it up to Q&A. And I think you may be on mute there, Todd.
All right, great. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Go.
So yeah, I was looking back through the minimum requirements, and it does say that a surgical or N95 mask is not required. So again, and then, you know, you can make your own mask. There's lots of YouTube videos out there and some simple things that you can do. So two real last points. The guidelines are changing. So I just noticed that the minimum requirements, they're on version 1.2 now. I would assume that probably in the near future, there'll be a version 1.3, 1.4. So check back on the Healthy at Work website for those. And then lastly, a resource that we're creating right now is sort of more of a consumer-facing campaign that's called Shop Healthy KY, and we've created a web landing page. Hopefully you all can see this. This is in its early stages, and we'll have more resources to add to the site. But it's basically a place where consumers can go and get some shopping guidelines, some tips and tricks, but it will also be a resource for retailers as well as we populate this site. So that'll be a resource that we'll have available.
All right, thanks, Todd. And those links to that site and the sites that John mentioned are in the chat box. So make sure you copy those and hang on to those. So with that, I think we'll open it up to some Q&A here. And Tony, you there?
Yes, I am, Dave. How are you?
Good. So before we get going, since I always talk first, I get to ask the first question, right? So here's the question I get a lot is, you know, these guidelines are out there and they're pretty specific in some instances. What happens if these guidelines are not followed at an establishment? Is there any, what happens? Are these legal requirements, or what do you guys think about that? What does the research say?
Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off, and then Todd, if you want to fill in the blanks there. So what has been communicated now is that there is a reporting line that is on the state's website, and so there is a function where your employee can note any issues related to incorporation or adherence. I am also aware that there is an inspection kind of process that follow-up on any issues that are submitted, and those can be conducted both at the state level or at the local level. It sounds like there's some coordination at local administrations. So the state officials, if they receive a report, they might collaborate with a local jurisdiction to stop in and just kind of see if they can be a resource or support or exactly what the issue is to come to a resolution.
Yeah, that's consistent with our understanding as well. We asked for local preemption in our proposal, and at this point have not received it. So we do know that the local health officials in those communities will probably be front and center when they get those complaints, and they may be stopping in at the businesses and the storefronts to just check on things, make sure that guidance is being followed.
Okay. I guess too, also there's probably, and I know this is in Congress, but there's probably a liability issue for businesses not following these guidelines.
Yeah, that's actually, there was a hearing yesterday in DC on that particular issue with business liability protection. So we'll see where that goes on a federal level, and we probably feel like that's going to happen on a federal level. I don't foresee it happening on the state level. You know, our General Assembly is not in session currently, so there wouldn't be an opportunity to pass any legislation at the state level at this point for Kentucky.
Yeah. Okay. Tony, what's in our chat box today?
Well, our first question comes from David Sauerbeck. His question is, what record keeping is required to document employee temperature and responses to the CDC questions? Do either one of you all have any information on record keeping requirements?
That is addressed in the minimum requirements document.
Okay.
The first version of that was a little more clear. The second version just refers to the most recent CDC guidance, but there is a series of questions that employers should have on hand. And again, they can look at that guidance. It has to do with basically screening those employees. Number one, do they have a temperature? And they can self-check it before they come into work, or an employer, if they have the digital thermometer, can take it at work. Do they have a cough? Do they have any muscle ache, sore throat, chills, loss of taste and smell? Those symptoms related to COVID-19 as we know them now. And then, I'm not an attorney and would certainly recommend you check with an HR professional or an attorney, but I would definitely consider document with whatever you decide to do for record keeping. I know us personally at our small office, we have a form that we have created, and we're asking our staff to sign off on that every morning when they show up to the office, now that we're open back at 50% of occupancy.
So John, I've got a question on top of that. So you mentioned signage as part of documentation. What specifically would a business have to have in the way of signage?
Yeah, so there has actually been a new requirement related to a requirement to post signage relating to your time off and the benefit of sick time. So making sure that your staff are aware that that they are eligible federally to take time off due to any illness related to COVID.
There is a Family Medical Leave Act sign, a new sign, isn't there, John, that they're required to post? Yeah.
Okay. Tony, what you got on the chat box?
The next question is from Amy. She wants to know, how does she figure out the legal occupancy in order to figure out the 33%?
Yeah, so it states 33% of the maximum permitted occupancy of the facility. So if you're a public building, the Kentucky Fire Code regulates that. So the fire marshal should have your stated occupancy number for the building. And so use that as a guide when you figure out your 33%. And again, it's 33% of the occupancy for your customers, not including staff or vendors. With the caveat being, you've got to stay 6 foot apart. So it might be less than 33% overall.
Go ahead, John.
I would just also make a note, as Todd kind of alluded to there, you really have to look at your facility. And so that 33% requirement has to then be interpreted by the layout of your operation. And so an example I might give would be, if you have a theater, and I know those aren't even on the list yet, but if 33% and everybody's in one theater, you're obviously not adhering to the social distancing. So the 33 is a threshold, and then it needs to be interpreted through the 6 foot distancing as you operationalize that.
Thank you.
I
Sorry,
was just going to offer, you can probably ask your local code officials to help you out with that too.
Okay, thank you. This question comes from David. He wants to know if you all have any suggestions or tips on opening a public restrooms, because he has public restrooms on his site.
My suggestion would kind of be to go back to some of these minimum requirements. I guess I would first really kind of evaluate, right, is it operationally imperative? I would, kind of put that into obviously a very high risk and a vulnerable high traffic environment. But if you do deem that as critical or necessary, I would institute my recommendation. And again, disclaimer here would be to have some processes in place for regular disinfecting and even to the degree of monitoring it per use.
Todd, this question actually would go to you. It's a retailer that's a mom and pop shop, and they basically want to know, do the minimum requirements, do they apply to a mom and pop shop that only has 1 employee in their store?
Yes, so the minimum requirements apply to any entity, business, office, anyone that's reopening.
Okay.
So yes.
This
Tony,
question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, David.
All right, I got a question from Katie. She says Katie owns a gym and she has the date of opening, but there's no specific guidance for this type of business. Do you expect more guidance to be issued from the governor's office as they get closer to the date?
They have noted that they are releasing the industry-specific guidelines a week out from the actual opening date, and so I know the retail was just recently proposed. Todd, unless you have other dates, I don't have any firm dates, but I would fully expect with the opening set for the 25th that you would expect. I expect restaurants any moment here in the next few days.
We're waiting on that one. I haven't seen that one yet, but yes.
I think as a rule of thumb, 1 week out.
Yep.
Yeah. Tony?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. David has this question. He says, what about common outside areas? What are the requirements for keeping those safe?
Social distance.
Well, he was in reference. His question is like Cracker Barrel has rocking chairs. So do you have to keep that disinfected as well?
Yes, keep those 6 foot apart, spread them out, and then come up with some kind of protocol to clean those on a regular interval.
Okay.
Yeah, to Todd's point, for a Cracker Barrel, they might consider removing a number of the chairs, creating a regular cleaning strategy around those, and again, monitoring.
Okay. Barbara wants to know, are we sharing the form that you sign in as an employee? Did we share that?
We did not.
Okay.
Is it on the website?
Which form is she?
Now, all those questions they're all in the minimum requirements document.
Okay.
They are. So
Yeah.
I think she's in reference to like for record keeping purposes that an employee signs in. Is that in the minimum requirements?
You come up with your own procedure for doing that. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, she says for measuring temperature. So you would come up with your own.
Oh. Yes. So, some businesses are just asking the question. If they're not screening them or taking a temp when they show up for their shift, if they are doing it as a self-temp check. Some are just asking the question, do you have a temperature of more than 100.4, yes or no? So they self-declare at that point. Some businesses are actually writing the temperature down. There may be some HIPAA restrictions surrounding that. I've heard different opinions on that legally, but there's no strict guidance that I've seen on it yet. I don't know if you've seen anything, John.
No, same with you. I've heard different organizations trying to adhere or incorporate it to the best of their ability, even including, just a pre-document that kind of establishes by clocking in or by coming to work, you have, and so it might not be a daily function, but a policy that they recognize and document.
Okay. My next question comes from Lori Glass. She wants to ask a question about contact tracing. She's got a small floral and gift shop, and she wants to know, does she have to get all names and contact information of any customer entering the store, even if they're only there for about 10 or 15 minutes? Do you all have any tips on that?
Yes, I'm trying to look that up because it is referenced in the minimum requirements document. I believe at this point they define contact as having been within someone with, yes, here it is. Close contact currently defined as being within 6 feet for more than 30 minutes with another individual.
I have another question from David. He says, but when you're talking about regular cleaning, is that interpreted as between every customer? Like, for example, when we used the rocking chairs earlier?
So I think there's some discretion here. It notes high traffic equipment and functions that would need regular cleaning. It talks about per customer cleaning more in medical environments, and so it doesn't necessarily say after every customer, but I think to the discretion of that company and that organization, I think we need to really assess what the vulnerability really is. But for those instances, I would say not after every customer, but a regularly scheduled process and monitoring. For instance, maybe you do the rocking chairs every 30 minutes, but the host out front saw somebody sneeze on a chair. So I do think that there has to be some flexibility along with a process of regular disinfectant.
Okay. This one is from Michelle. She wants to know if you are allowed to ask if employees have been tested for COVID or have come in contact with anyone with COVID.
I believe that is one of the questions. Again, I would refer her back to the CDC guidance on that, because they do have a series of questions that businesses should be using for that.
Okay. David, that looks like that's all of the questions in our chat. Do you have any additional questions?
I do have a question from Joe, who's a plumber, and he doesn't expect to see any specific guidelines for plumbers, but he's asking about his employees when they go into a home to do a repair and the homeowner is not wearing masks or things like that. Is there any recommendations that you guys have for something like that? Kind of specific, but any thoughts on that based on your all's research?
I don't mind taking a swing at this one. Yeah. So I would, at this point, maybe refer them to some of the construction guidelines. It does not necessarily solve for that specific question, but what it talks about, you've heard this term of the health officers and their role. Well, within site-based operations, there is now mention of a health coordinator. And so those coordinators' function is to really assess specific job sites, vulnerabilities, and strategies to mitigate. And so for the plumbing example, without firm guidelines yet, and I do believe that there will be some more specific for those industries. Right now, I would look to existing guidelines to say, if your company wants to create a policy related to their willingness to enter a home with or without the customer wearing PPE, my understanding that could be an operational decision that company makes, in addition to an operational decision to provide the PPE to those customers when you're in their home. And so there's not a lot of clarity around that right now, but just looking at some of the guidelines that are in place, I see a path, and it's really around site location per site and incorporating strategies and processes and best practices to protect your staff in those environments. What policies or procedures are you going to in place to secure that business, but also to protect your employees? And I think there are a host of recommendations or best practices that could be incorporated.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just generally, just use common sense. What you would, I've been saying this, do what you tell your first graders. Don't pick your nose, keep your fingers out of your mouth, and quit touching everything, and wash your hands. And then in addition to that, I think the minimum requirements lay out pretty good guidelines on what you're supposed to do, and just use common sense about it, Going back to Michelle's question, I think her answer is in the health screening section. So if she'll pull that document and look through that, she'll find the answer to some of those questions.
All right. Any other questions, Tony?
There are no other questions in our chat box.
Actually, I think there is, Tony, if you take a look about the community theater.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Thank you, Janet.
Yeah, just came up.
So we have a local community theater that is preparing to open. Which guidelines would you suggest they use for their reopening?
I am kind of looking at the list of dates and industries that are opening, and I'd be open to either their specific feedback, but I guess I'm looking more in the theater, movie theaters, those types of environments. And so that would be June 1, with those guidelines likely coming out around the week of May 25th.
But certainly make sure they've got all the minimums taken care of ahead of time. They can at least be doing that.
I would, one last kind of plug or note, I would just, on our website, GLI's resources website, you can access our best practices, and we do have a document in there. Again, this is not the governor's guidelines, but it is a research document based on clinical and community best practices. And one of those sectors that we grouped together was around civic assets. And that includes environments where you have a kind of large community congregation. And so in advance of the governor's documents coming out, as I know that everybody's trying to prepare in advance, that might be a nice resource to view.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today. I tell you what, this is a lot to take in at once, and but it's also exciting at the same time because now we're planning to reopen our businesses as opposed to trying to keep them shut down. And I also think this is a great opportunity to really take a look at your processes in your business and look at it as a way to improve operations, improve employee morale and safety, and really dig in and use this as a strategic planning opportunity. So I want to thank Todd and John for your time today. You guys are great experts. And I know from the very beginning, both you guys with GLI and the Retail Federation have been digging into this thing, really watching it and putting out good resources for the community. I really want to thank you for your involvement in what you guys have done. So, Tony, any last words from you or Janet?
We do have one last question. And I just wanted to, sorry, Emily wants to know, and this actually goes to John. Is the Greater Louisville Inc. Does it have PPE on that Greater Louisville Inc. forum that you were talking about? Okay, I'll just let her know yes. Okay.
Well, let me actually answer that. So on the website that I referenced, there are a list of vendors or resources that we're just brokering the contacts. And so you can get on there and you can begin reaching out and developing a relationship with those vendors. In addition to that, GLI has secured a small number of face masks, more of the paper cloth version of the face mask. And we are selling those at cost in increments of 50 based upon, we had a lot of companies that are telling us that it's been very difficult for them to order 50 or 100 or even 200 until they get to a volume level that gets the attention of some of the suppliers. And so what we have done is we have secured face masks. And so anybody that is interested, we'll share my email. But if you want to email me directly, I will send you a link to a form that you would fill out. The only note, because I do know that we have a lot of folks from around the state on the call, these are pickup only from our GLI office. And so just a note that if you're in Pikeville, that might be a long drive for 50 face masks. But happy to be a resource, and we'll offer that information to Dave and the team. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending today, as always. So with that, we'll say goodbye and see you next Wednesday. So have a good day and be safe out there.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.